Today we're going to start a new series. In the series I've titled Hindsight, because how many of you have ever said, thought about the expression, if I knew then what I know now, things would have been different. I would have made different choices. I would have done things differently. I might have been there as opposed to where I really was. And, if I could foresee what was coming in the future, then I would make better decisions in my past life, in history. Yes, I know, Colton. How many of you, now here, guys, do you guys have, I want you to know, I want to know if you have this toy. Bring up the next slide. An Etch-a-Sketch. How many of you remember the Etch-a-Sketch? Huh? Does Colton have one? Well, get busy. He's got to have an Etch-a-Sketch. This cool little red little box about the size of this tablet here, and it has little dials on it so that you could move the little cursor in different directions and draw pictures and all of those cool things on it. There weren't any batteries on it. It didn't beep and make noises. It didn't connect to your friends or anything else. It was just one of those cool toys that we had when I was growing up. But the really cool thing about the Etch-a-Sketch is when you made a mistake, you could hold it up in the air and shake that sucker, and what happened? It went away. And the screen was wiped out. It was cleared. Wouldn't it be, huh? Yeah, well, first laptop maybe. But, the Etch-a-Sketch was one of those things that you could start over with. You could refresh it. You could renew it. Wouldn't it be nice if life was like an Etch-a-Sketch? Think about it. Max out your credit cards. All you got to do is just hold them up, just shake them suckers, Yes. And they'd clear themselves just like that. I know. It doesn't really work that way, does it? You see, we're all on this thing, this road trip called life. And in essence, what we're doing here is we are spending a short amount of time in our life in a place where we will make a choice, we'll make a decision for our eternal life, our eternal destiny. Colton's all excited today, isn't he? That's okay. But this thing called life that we're walking in, we all have a tendency to mess it up sometimes. We all have a tendency to get in trouble with God. We don't always make perfect decisions. We don't always see what's coming around the corner. We can see what happened in the past, and we can say, if I knew then what I know today, that's one thing. But the reality is we mess it up. We make mistakes. We all need a chance to start over. Starting over is a very biblical principle. This is something that many people I've talked to over the years when it comes to the Bible, and it talks about God's plan, and we talk about faith and all those things. Most people don't associate starting over with God's plan, but it is. Starting over is a huge part of the plan. Back in Old Testament times, there was a thing called the Year of Jubilee. Now, the Year of Jubilee was this year that started in the nation of Israel. And the way they would introduce the Jubilee year was they would blow ram's horns, and they would have this ceremony. And what it did was it signaled freedom for all of the Israelites. And it also signaled a relief from debt and slavery. It was called the Year of Jubilee. Now, here's the way it worked. Let's say you were a Jew back then, and you're providing for your family, and you're doing the best that you can do, and you're trying to make ends meet and provide and whatever, and you're working this property, this land that was passed down to you from, generations. It was in your family, and you're working it, but expenses and things happen. Well, let's say you got yourself into trouble. Let's say you had to go into debt, and you borrowed money, and then you couldn't pay it back. You see, what would happen back then is you would have to either pay that debt back by selling the property that you owned, that had been passed down to you through the generations, or you could sell your family into slavery. It doesn't sound a whole lot of fun. Now, by selling your family into slavery, what you were doing is you were saying to the person that you owed, my family and I will work for you solely, and you will provide food and shelter for us, but we will work for you solely until we earn that debt back, until we can pay that debt off by working. Well, back then, there weren't any bankruptcy laws and things of that nature, so those were really the only options you had. You know, you could, like I said, you could pay your debts back, or if you couldn't, the only thing you really owned was property that had been passed down from one generation to another, probably. Or you could sell your family into slavery. Well, this year of Jubilee was kind of like God's divine etch-a-sketch. Every 50 years, what you could do was take your life and hold it up in the air and shake it back and forth. You see, every 50 years, what happened was the land, the ownership of the land reverted back to its original owner. So if I sold you a piece of property, or I traded you a piece of property because of the debt that I owed you, the longest you or your family could own it would be 50 years. And then it would automatically return to me. And if I wasn't here, it would return to my family. That's the way it worked. The same time, if I sold my family into service to you or into slavery to you to pay back a debt, the longest that could take place, again, was 50 years. You see, this was God's plan so that it would retain Israel's agricultural culture. It would keep the economy out of the hands of a few lords, out of a few landowners' hands. You couldn't have somebody who would just keep amassing all of this property and pass it on to their kids and their kids, and all of a sudden you'd have one person or a couple of families that owned everything. That was not the plan that God had. That's why God said every 50 years, all of this stuff is wiped out. All of the debts are cleared. So if, let's say, it was 2 years from the year of Jubilee, and I ran out of money and I couldn't pay you, I could sell the property that I had, pay you back, but 2 years later, it was coming back to me. Same thing with ownership of family services. If my family was going to be serving you, working in your fields and all to pay back the debt, again, the longest it could last would be 50 years, but it would always revert back on the year of Jubilee. Another reason that God did this was to provide the nation of Israel this idea of hope. That even if you had messed up in life, even if you had overextended yourself and gone out on a limb and things didn't work out the way that you wanted, there was hope at the end of the tunnel. Because the year of Jubilee would bring back your family to themselves. You wouldn't have to be indebted to another person. It would relieve you of the responsibility of owing somebody and having to sell your property. No, that wasn't God's plan. God's plan was that you would have some of this property that you could provide for your family, you could live on, you could pass it down to your kids and so forth. But God realized that many times people mess up and people need to start over. You need to rethink some of the things that we do. Now, I've learned a few things in my life. I've learned that good things happen and bad things happen. I've learned that these things happen sometimes at the hand of God. I've learned that sometimes these things happen at the hand of Satan. I've learned that sometimes these things happen, good and bad, by other people or simply by circumstances. And I've also learned that sometimes these good and bad things happen because of me. I can be my own worst enemy. All of us at various times need the opportunity to start over. We need a year of Jubilee. Probably one of the best known examples of someone who started over is this guy. Anybody know who he is? Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey, oh, that hurt. Dave Ramsey is an interesting example because at the age of 26, and this is years ago, 26 years old, here's a guy that is making $250,000 a year, and he had a $4 million real estate portfolio. 26 years old. I would say he was living high on the hog back then. Now, 2 years later, at 28, Dave Ramsey is bankrupt, doesn't own a thing, and is head over heels deep in debt. And he's like, what do I do now? What do I do now? Today, Dave Ramsey, at like 58 or 60 years old, he's one of America's most important and well-known financial gurus. The Dave Ramsey Show is one of the top 5 radio broadcast shows in the world. He has over 13 million listeners every time he gets on the radio. Broadcast over 600 different radio stations around the globe. And today he's worth about $55 million. Why? Dave Ramsey started to realize early on that it was the basic biblical principles of whether it's the Jubilee or ownership or wealth, the things that the scriptures teach about how to handle money and how to handle relationships with people when you're doing business, that he messed up on. And he started to order his life biblically. One of his favorite verses is this one. It comes from the book of Proverbs 22. It says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. You see, it's exactly what I was talking about with the nation of Israel. You know, you get yourself head over heels in debt, or you mess up and you can't pay your bills back. Well, guess what? The rich are going to rule over you. You know, and if you have to borrow money, guess what? You are subject to that person that you owe money to. I want you to know that part of God's plan is starting over. It really is. Part of God's plan for you, whether it's from financial problems, whether it's from physical issues, whether it's from maybe just poor decisions that you've made in life, or betrayals, or addictions, or all of these types of things. God's plan for his people is for them to start over. This is kind of a foreign concept to a lot of people, because we get this idea that to be a Christian, I should just keep getting everything right, and I keep getting better and better and better and better and better. Well, that would be nice. But God is a realist too. God understands human nature because he designed it. And he understands that through this thing called free will and human nature and all of the things that we live in, we will make mistakes. So part of his plan for people is to be able to start over. Look what Jesus did or what God did for Adam and Eve. What did he do for them? Adam and Eve are in this perfect existence, in the perfect Garden of Eden, and their life is good, and they've all got all of this stuff to do. And what happens? They screw it up. They mess it up. They fall short. And God immediately goes into action, and he says, well, let me make you some clothes, and you're going to be leaving here, and you're going to go out into a physical world where you're going to be subject to a lot of things. But during that time out there, you'll learn. And you'll be able to make more intelligent decisions, and your wisdom will grow, and you'll start to understand things to a new level and a deeper degree, and you can make choices like returning to me and living according to my rules and my guidelines, not because I'm mean, but because I'm here to protect you. Look what God has done for Adam and Eve. And it goes all the way down to Joe and Darcy. God is a God of provision. He is a God that expects and anticipates that we start over from time to time. Look at the ministry of Jesus. Man, you can't look at the stuff that Jesus did or the stuff that Jesus talked about and not realize that he was all about starting over. He was all about it. Man, he looked at the Pharisees and he told them what was, he wasn't being mean to them. He was trying to give these people an understanding so that they could realize what the coming kingdom of God was really all about. He was trying to let people see where they'd missed the boat. Look at what Jesus did for Peter. Peter, this rock that Jesus said, I'm going to build my church on this guy. And not the gates of hell are going to come against him. And yet Peter faltered and he stuck his foot in his mouth and he betrayed and he ran away. He did all these things. But Jesus was constantly giving Peter the opportunity to start over. That Peter could look in the rearview mirror, see the mistakes of his life, see where he had fallen short, and make new choices and new decisions and start over. Jesus never condemned him for that. Never. He doesn't condemn any of us when it's time to start over or make a new direction. That's why I tell everybody, you know what? I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you've been. Where you've been, I don't care anything about your life. It is never too late. And you never give up. You never give up. You never give up. Why? Because Jesus didn't. He never gave up on humankind. Never. Look what Jesus did for those two thieves on the cross. One of them says, hey, we're getting what we deserve. This guy, he didn't do anything. So Jesus, remember me when you go into your kingdom. And Jesus said, you know what? Today you'll be with me in paradise. Why did he say that? Because the guy had an opportunity to start over. It might have been short-lived, of course. He's on a cross dying. But Jesus always gave the opportunities to renew, to refresh, to start again, to learn from the mistakes, to become something new that you weren't, hours ago or days or years ago. Why would we ever let the guilt of failure overwhelm us? Shouldn't. That's another one of the things that Dave Ramsey, in some of his interviews, emphasizes, is don't let your shortcomings overwhelm you. Don't look back and say, oh, man, what a loser. Look how much I've messed up. And, it's never going to be, oh, poor me. No. No, you learn from the things that you've done. You look back, but then you turn around and you look forward. And you look forward right at God. And you say, I'm still on the journey. I need you. I need you to walk with me. I need your wisdom and your guidance. And I'm going to hopefully make better choices this time with you. And I'm going to follow your word. I started looking in the Bible and thinking about some of these people that the stories are quite strange. Like, what about Jonah and the whale? I mean, come on. Guy's running away from God and some big fish eats him up and somehow he stays alive in the belly of a whale and then he gets puked up on the shore somewhere. I mean, come on. God is a God of second chances. He is a God that says you can always start again, and I expect it. That's what the story is about. It's not the miraculous way Jonah survived or anything else. It's about a new opportunity to start fresh. All of us can. Don't get hung up on the failures. Always look to God for his guidance and his wisdom and the things that he's doing for us so that we can start over. That's what this is, right? Isn't that what the table is all about? Isn't that what the death and the resurrection of Jesus is all about? Starting over again? So the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and he broke it and he said, "This is my body which will be broken for you so that you can start fresh." Let that sink in. And then he said, "This is my blood, blood of a new and an everlasting covenant, a new deal." He said, "You know what? I'm going to let my blood flow so that you can start fresh. You might have put me on the cross. You might have pounded the nails in my hands and my feet. You might have done all kinds of horrific things in your life. You might have done all kinds of things against God throughout your life. But today is a new day. And there's a new, fresh opportunity for you to reestablish yourself not only in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God. I love the fact that God is all about starting over, because I can't tell you how many times I have needed it myself.